Rachel Carter, a brilliant defense attorney, finds herself on the wrong side of the law after a routine traffic stop spirals into a calculated takedown. Accused of crimes she didn't commit and stripped of crucial evidence, Rachel uncovers a dangerous conspiracy that links corrupt law enforcement to a powerful corporation desperate to silence her. With betrayal lurking at every corner and a relentless enemy pulling the strings, she must navigate treacherous waters to expose the truth and protect everything she stands for. The stakes are high, the danger is real, and every move could be her last. Stick around to find out how Rachel fights back and if justice will prevail. Don't miss the second of this gripping story. Where are you tuning in from today? And make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. It was a chilly evening when Rachel Carter, a celebrated criminal defense attorney, drove home after a long day in court. Her latest case, defending a whistleblower against a corrupt corporate giant, had gained national attention. With the radio playing softly, Rachel allowed herself a rare moment of relaxation. As she approached a quiet intersection, flashing red and blue lights illuminated her rearview mirror. Confused but compliant, Rachel pulled over. A young officer, stern-faced and unyielding, approached her car. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone void of courtesy. Rachel handed over her documents, her lawyer instincts tingling. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" The officer ignored her question, glancing at her ID before stepping back to his cruiser. Rachel waited, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, the unease growing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the officer returned, now joined by a second older cop. "Step out of the car, ma'am," the older officer, Sergeant Blake, ordered. "What's this about?" Rachel asked, her voice steady but firm. Blake frowned. "We have a warrant for your arrest. You match the description of a suspect in a theft case." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "That's impossible. I've been in court all day. Check my alibi." But her protests were met with cold indifference. "Hands behind your back," Blake barked, and before she could process the situation, the cold steel of handcuffs locked around her wrists. Passers-by slowed to gawk, some pulling out their phones to record. The humiliation was palpable. Rachel felt her stomach knot as she noticed a figure among the onlookers, a man in a dark hoodie, watching intently before vanishing into the shadows. At the station, Rachel sat in an interrogation room, the walls closing in. She demanded to contact her legal team, but her requests were stonewalled. Hours passed before she was finally released, pending further investigation. As Rachel retrieved her belongings, a sinking feeling hit her briefcase, containing sensitive documents for the whistleblower case, was missing. She asked about it, but the officers shrugged dismissively. Driving home with her mind racing, Rachel replayed every moment of the stop. Who had orchestrated this? Was it merely a case of mistaken identity or something more sinister? As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with a block number. Against her better judgment, she answered. A deep voice crackled through the line. "You should have dropped that case, Ms. Carter. Consider this a warning." The line went dead. Rachel stood frozen, the weight of the threat settling on her. Someone was watching her every move, and this was just the beginning. Rachel sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, the chilling voice from the call echoing in her mind. Who had threatened her? Why was her whistleblower case suddenly attracting such aggression? Questions swirled, but one thing was clear: this was no random traffic stop. The missing briefcase gnawed at her. It contained confidential files on Sinclair Tech, the corporation accused of defrauding thousands of employees. The evidence within could dismantle their legal defense. If those documents fell into the wrong hands, her client's case and career was in jeopardy. The next morning, Rachel arrived at her law office, determination masking the anxiety she felt. Her assistant, Mia, greeted her with a concerned look. "Are you okay? I saw videos of your arrest online. It's everywhere." Rachel flinched. She hadn't checked the news, but she could imagine the headlines. The image of a high-profile lawyer being cuffed on the side of the road would undoubtedly spread like wildfire. "I'm fine," Rachel lied, heading straight to her office. Once inside, she closed the door and dialed the precinct. "Sergeant Blake," a gruff voice answered. "This is Rachel Carter," she said, keeping her tone firm. "My briefcase was missing after my arrest. I need it returned immediately." There was a pause before Blake replied. "There was no briefcase logged with your belongings. Are you sure you had it?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "Yes, I'm sure. It was in my car when you stopped me." "Then you'll need to file a report," Blake said flatly. Rachel hung up, fury simmering beneath her calm exterior. Blake's dismissiveness confirmed her suspicion this wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate. Before she could dwell further, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel, a trusted investigator she often worked with on cases. "Rachel, you need to see this," Daniel said, his voice low. "Meet me at the cafe on 10th. 20 minutes later, Rachel slid into a booth opposite Daniel, who placed his laptop on the table. On the screen was surveillance footage from outside her office building. "What am I looking at?" Rachel asked. Daniel hit play. The video showed a black SUV idling near her office the night before her arrest. A man in a dark hoodie exited the vehicle and picked the lock on the building's side door. "Who is that?" Rachel whispered. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Daniel replied. "But look at this." He zoomed in on the man's wrist, revealing a tattoo partially hidden beneath his sleeve, a stylized S. The logo of Sinclair Tech. Rachel's stomach dropped. "You think Sinclair sent someone to steal the files?" Daniel nodded. "It's possible. But here's the kicker, the man didn't come out with anything. It's like he knew exactly where to go, but your office was empty." Rachel leaned back, her mind racing. Someone had infiltrated her office, and her arrest wasn't a coincidence. The warning call, the missing briefcase, it was all connected. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. At the police station, she'd noticed Sergeant Blake exchange a knowing glance with someone in plain clothes. Could Blake be working with Sinclair Tech? Rachel clenched her fists. If they thought they could silence her, they had underestimated her resolve. "We need to find that briefcase," she told Daniel. "And we need to find out who's pulling the strings." As they left the cafe, Rachel noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The moment she stepped outside, the car pulled away, but not before she caught a glimpse of the driver, a face she recognized but couldn't immediately place. Rachel's pulse quickened. Someone was watching her every move. Rachel's thoughts raced as she returned to her office, Daniel by her side. The face she glimpsed in the black sedan lingered in her mind, just out of reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue. Inside, she pulled up her client files, determined to connect the dots. Sinclair Tech was no stranger to controversy, but Rachel hadn't expected them to stoop this low. As she scanned through her notes, her phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "Check your email," the message read. Rachel opened her inbox and saw a subject line that made her heart skip. Surveillance footage from the traffic stop. Clicking it open, she watched the video Mia had sent. It was a dashcam recording from a bystander's car, capturing the moment Sergeant Blake arrested her. At first, it showed nothing unusual, just Blake cuffing her while the younger officer stood by. But then Rachel saw something chilling. As she was being placed in the squad car, the younger officer subtly opened her car door and handed the briefcase to a man in plain clothes standing nearby. "That's him," Rachel whispered, her hand trembling as she paused the video. Daniel leaned in. "The guy from the sedan?" Rachel nodded. The plainclothes man had the same build, the same neatly trimmed beard. But now she could clearly see the Sinclair Tech ID badge clipped to his belt. "This isn't just a coincidence," Daniel muttered. "This is coordinated." Rachel felt a cold determination settle over her. She had enough to confront Blake and demand answers. "I'm going to the precinct," she said. Daniel grabbed her arm. "Rachel, wait. You're walking into their territory." If Blake's involved, he'll cover his tracks. You need leverage before you go. He was right. Rachel needed proof that couldn't be ignored. Then we need to find that man, she said, pointing to the paused image on the screen. Daniel frowned. That's going to take time. If he works for Sinclair, they'll bury his identity. Rachel's phone buzzed again, interrupting their conversation. This time it was an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. You don't listen, do you, Miss Carter? The voice growled. It was the same deep, menacing tone from the previous night. Who are you? Rachel demanded, her anger overriding her fear. The caller chuckled. I'm the one trying to keep you alive. Drop the case, Rachel. Walk away. While you still can. Or what? She shot back. The line went silent for a moment before the voice replied, or we'll make sure you never practice law again. The call ended, leaving Rachel gripping her phone in frustration. Daniel's face hardened. They're scared. That's why they're escalating. Rachel sighed. Then we need to scare them back. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Detective Reynolds, the voice said. Reynolds, it's Rachel Carter. I need your help. Reynolds was an old ally, a detective with a reputation for rooting out corruption. If anyone could help Rachel uncover the truth, it was him. Rachel, he said cautiously, I heard about your arrest. What's going on? Rachel quickly explained, detailing the missing briefcase, the surveillance footage, and the man with the Sinclair Tech badge. Reynolds let out a low whistle. You're playing a dangerous game, but if Blake's involved, I'll dig into it. Thank you, Rachel said. And Reynolds, be careful. Whoever's behind this doesn't play fair. As Rachel hung up, she felt a sliver of hope. But as she turned back to Daniel, a loud crash shattered the quiet of her office. The window behind them exploded inward, glass scattering across the room. Daniel shoved Rachel to the floor as a brick landed on her desk, a note tied to it with a red ribbon. Rachel's heart pounded as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the note. Scrawled in jagged handwriting were 3 words. Last. Warning. Leave. Rachel stared at the jagged handwriting on the note, her pulse pounding in her ears. Daniel crouched beside her, brushing shards of glass from his jacket. They're escalating, he said grimly, his eyes scanning the room for any other threats. Rachel gritted her teeth, crumpling the note in her hand. And they're getting sloppy. This threat means they're desperate. Before Daniel could respond, her phone buzzed again. It was Detective Reynolds. Rachel answered quickly, her voice sharp. Reynolds, please tell me you found something. His voice was strained. Not yet. But you were right about Blake. He's been transferring large sums of money to a private account tied to a holding company. Guess who owns it? Sinclair Tech, Rachel said, her stomach sinking. Bingo. But there's more, Reynolds continued. The man in your footage? I found him. His name is Evan Rhodes, head of corporate security for Sinclair. He's ex-military, with a reputation for handling problems quietly. If Rhodes is involved, this goes higher than we thought. Rachel clenched the phone tighter. I need proof, Reynolds. Something solid to tie Blake, Rhodes, and Sinclair together. Reynolds hesitated. I'm working on it, but I have to be careful. Blake's not just corrupt, he's paranoid. Someone tipped him off that I'm looking into him. Rachel felt a chill. Tipped him off? By who? Reynolds sighed. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Be careful, Rachel. This isn't just a legal battle anymore, it's personal. As the call ended, Rachel turned to Daniel. We need to find Evan Rhodes. If he's the one pulling strings for Sinclair, we start there. Daniel nodded, pulling out his laptop. I'll track him, but it'll take time. If he's as careful as Reynolds says, he won't be easy to find. Rachel nodded, pacing the room. Her mind churned through the details, Blake's money transfers, Rhodes' involvement, the escalating threats. Then a thought struck her. Mia, she said suddenly. Daniel looked up. What about her? Rachel's brow furrowed. She sent me that dashcam footage. How did she get it? I never asked. Rachel dialed Mia's number. Her assistant answered on the first ring. Rachel, are you okay? I heard about the brick. I'm fine. Rachel interrupted. Mia, the footage you sent me, where did it come from? Mia hesitated. A source. They reached out anonymously, said they wanted to help you. Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. Did they say anything else? Did you meet them in person? No, just email, Mia replied. Why? What's going on? Rachel's instinct screamed at her. If someone was feeding Mia information, they could be manipulating her, or worse, using her as a pawn. Be careful, Mia, Rachel said. Don't trust anyone you don't know. As Rachel hung up, Daniel's laptop pinged. Got something? He said. He turned the screen toward Rachel, showing a location pinned on a map, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Rhodes was spotted here 2 days ago. It's registered to one of Sinclair's subsidiaries. Rachel's jaw tightened. Then that's where we go. That night, Rachel and Daniel drove to the warehouse in silence, the tension thick between them. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows blacked out and its perimeter guarded by high fences. This is insane, Daniel muttered as they parked a block away. It's our only lead, Rachel replied, her voice firm. They approached the warehouse cautiously, sticking to the shadows. A side door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. Too easy, Daniel whispered. Rachel nodded, her instincts on high alert. Stay close. Inside, the warehouse was eerily quiet. Rows of crates stretched into the darkness, their labels obscured. Rachel's flashlight illuminated a trail of muddy footprints leading deeper into the building. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the cavernous space. You're persistent, Miss Carter. Rachel froze, her flashlight cutting through the shadows to reveal Evan Rhodes. He stood at the far end of the warehouse, flanked by 2 men in suits. Rhodes, Rachel said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You've gone to a lot of trouble to keep me quiet. Rhodes smirked. You should have walked away. Now you've forced my hand. Before Rachel could respond, the lights flickered on, blinding her. She turned to find Daniel with his hands raised, a gun pressed to his back. Her blood ran cold as she realized the truth. You set me up, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's expression was unreadable. I'm sorry, Rachel, but they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Rachel stood frozen, her mind racing as she processed Daniel's betrayal. She searched his face for some sign of hesitation, but his expression remained cold, his hands raised in mock submission. Daniel, she said, her voice trembling with both fury and disbelief. You were supposed to have my back. Daniel shrugged, avoiding her eyes. It's not personal, Rachel. They offered me more than loyalty ever could. Evan Rhodes stepped forward, his presence commanding. Enough with the drama, he said, his voice sharp. Ms. Carter, you've caused enough trouble. Hand over everything you have on Sinclair Tech, and maybe I'll let you walk out of here. Rachel glared at him, forcing herself to remain calm. You think this ends with me? People are watching. They'll know if anything happens. Rhodes chuckled darkly. You overestimate how much people care. By the time anyone realizes you're gone, the story will be buried under the next scandal. He gestured to the 2 guards flanking him. Take her phone and her bag. I want everything she's carrying. Rachel's mind worked frantically as the guards approached. Her phone contained encrypted files and communications tied to her case, but she had no guarantee they wouldn't break through. She needed a distraction, and fast. Wait, she said, raising her hands. If I give you the files, what happens to Daniel? He's my investigator. You're not going to let him go, are you? Rhodes paused, his eyes narrowing. Why would I care about your investigator? Rachel shrugged, stalling for time. Because he knows everything I know. If you don't eliminate him, he could turn on you. Daniel's eyes widened in alarm. Rachel, what are you? I wouldn't trust him if I were you, Rachel continued, cutting him off. After all, he's already betrayed me. Who's to say he won't betray you next? The seed of doubt planted itself in Rhodes' mind. He turned to Daniel, his expression hardening. Is that true? Do you have copies of her files? Daniel stammered, his confidence faltering. No, I of course not. But it was too late. Rhodes nodded to one of the guards. Search him. As the guard moved toward Daniel, Rachel took her chance. She lunged for a metal pipe resting against a nearby crate, swinging it at the second guard before he could react. The impact sent him sprawling, his weapon clattering to the ground. Rhodes shouted, "Get her, but..." Rachel was already moving. She grabbed the fallen weapon and aimed it at Rhodes. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The room fell silent, tension crackling like static. Rhodes held up his hands, his smirk replaced by a wary glare. "You won't shoot," he said. Rachel's grip tightened. "Try me." Before Rhodes could respond, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Rhodes cursed under his breath, signaling to his remaining guard. "We're leaving. This isn't over, Carter." As Rhodes and his men retreated, Rachel kept the weapon trained on them until they disappeared into the shadows. Then she turned to Daniel, who was still frozen in place. "You betrayed me," she said coldly. "But you're not getting away with it." "Rachel, please," Daniel stammered, backing away. "I didn't have a choice. They threatened my family." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You always have a choice. And now you'll face the consequences of yours." She pulled out her backup phone, a burner she always carried for emergencies, and dialed Reynolds. "This is Carter," she said. "I need you at the Sinclair warehouse on Industrial Road. Bring backup." Daniel's shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're calling." "The cops." "Rachel, they'll tear me apart." "You should have thought of that before you sold me out," she snapped. Minutes later, Reynolds and a team of officers arrived, securing the scene. As Daniel was led away in cuffs, Rachel felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. But as she watched the flashing lights of the police vehicles, a nagging thought crept into her mind. Rhodes and his men had retreated too easily. Whatever their next move was, she knew it would be bigger, bolder, and more dangerous. Rachel sat in the back of her car, exhaustion settling in as Reynolds drove her back to her office. The events at the warehouse replayed in her mind the betrayal, the threats, and the eerie ease with which Rhodes had retreated. Reynolds glanced at her. "You were lucky tonight," he said. "Rhodes isn't the kind of man to leave loose ends. This isn't over." "I know," Rachel replied, staring out the window. "But we need to move faster. They're planning something bigger, and we're running out of time." As they pulled up to her office building, Rachel noticed something was off. A faint flicker of light in her office window caught her attention. "Wait," she said, grabbing Reynolds' arm. "Someone's inside." Reynolds parked down the block, and they approached the building cautiously. The lobby was dark, but the elevator lights glowed, indicating recent use. Rachel's pulse quickened as they climbed the stairs to her floor, Reynolds' hand resting on the weapon at his hip. The door to her office was ajar. Rachel pushed it open slowly, revealing a ransacked space. Papers were scattered across the floor, her computer monitor shattered, and the air smelled faintly of smoke. "They're looking for something," Reynolds muttered, his eyes scanning the room. Rachel moved to her desk, her heart sinking as she saw her backup hard drive missing. It contained crucial evidence for the Sinclair case, files that hadn't yet been encrypted. Reynolds knelt by a crumpled piece of paper on the floor, frowning as he unfolded it. "They left you a message." Rachel leaned over his shoulder to read the words scrawled in bold marker. "You should have taken the warning." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. It was Mia. "Rachel, are you okay?" Mia's voice was shaky. "I just got an email from your account. Someone's threatening to release your files." Rachel's blood ran cold. "What files?" "The Sinclair files," Mia said. "They attached screenshots." "They're real, Rachel." her hands clenched into fists. Whoever had broken in wasn't just trying to scare her, they were preparing to weaponize her own case against her. Reynolds stood, his expression grim. This isn't just intimidation anymore. They're escalating to sabotage. Rachel nodded, determination burning through her fear. Then we escalate too. Can you trace the email? Mia hesitated. I can try, but it's routed through multiple proxies. It might take time. Do it, Rachel said. Ending the call, Reynolds placed a hand on her shoulder. We should get you somewhere safe. If they know where you live, you're a sitting target. I'm not running, Rachel replied firmly. If I hide, they'll win. I'm staying, but we need to hit back hard. Hours later, Rachel sat in a secure location Reynolds had arranged, surrounded by files and notes. She and Reynolds were poring over every connection to Sinclair Tech, trying to piece together their next move. What about Rhodes? Reynolds asked. Any way to get to him? Rachel frowned. Not directly. But if he's running security for Sinclair, he'll have a digital trail. Expenses, transactions, something we can exploit. As she spoke, her phone pinged with a notification. It was a text from an unknown number. You're out of your depth, Carter. Leave, or your career won't be all you lose. Rachel's jaw tightened. They're watching me. Reynolds leaned closer. We can use that. If they're watching, let's feed them bad intel. What are you suggesting? A trap, Reynolds said. We leak false information about where you're keeping your files. Draw them out and catch them in the act. Rachel considered it, her mind racing. It's risky. If it backfires, they'll know we're onto them. But it's our best shot, Reynolds said. They've been one step ahead. Let's turn the tables. The next day, Rachel sent out a series of encrypted emails to her legal team, knowing Rhodes and his associates would intercept them. The emails detailed a fictitious location where she claimed to be storing a critical backup of the Sinclair evidence. That evening, Reynolds and a team of officers staked out the location, a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Rachel watched from a surveillance van, her nerves frayed as the minutes ticked by. Anything yet? She asked, her voice tense. Reynolds shook his head. Patience. They'll come. Hours passed with no movement. Just as Rachel began to doubt the plan, a black SUV pulled into the lot. It's them, Reynolds whispered, signaling his team to move into position. The SUV doors opened, and Rhodes stepped out, flanked by two men. They approached the storage unit cautiously, unaware of the officers closing in. Rachel held her breath as the trap closed around them. But then Rhodes stopped, his head tilting slightly as if sensing something was wrong. Abort, he barked, turning back. To the SUV. The officers sprang into action, but Rhodes and his men were already retreating. Tires screeched as the SUV sped away, disappearing into the night. Reynolds cursed under his breath. They knew. Rachel sank back into her seat, frustration boiling over. How? How did they know? Reynolds didn't answer, his face grim. Somewhere, someone had tipped them off again. Rachel's frustration was palpable as the surveillance van pulled away from the failed operation. Reynolds sat beside her, his jaw tight as he reviewed the events in silence. They were too careful, Rachel said, breaking the silence. They didn't just stumble onto that trap. Someone warned them. Reynolds nodded, his brow furrowed. It has to be an insider. Someone on the team tipped them off. Rachel leaned back, the weight of the realization pressing down on her. Who? And why? If Sinclair has someone inside law enforcement, this is bigger than we thought. Reynolds' radio crackled to life, interrupting their conversation. Team Bravo to command, a voice said. No sign of the suspects. We're pulling back. Rachel closed her eyes, fighting the surge of doubt threatening to consume her. Every move she made seemed to play right into Sinclair's hands. As the van pulled into a secure lot, Rachel stepped out and paced in the cold night air. She needed answers now. The next morning, Rachel gathered her team, including Mia and Reynolds, in her office. The tension was thick as she laid out the situation. "Someone leaked our plan," Rachel said, her voice firm. "We need to find out." "Who?" Mia frowned, looking hurt. "You think it's one of us?" "I don't want to," Rachel admitted. "But we can't ignore the facts. Whoever it is, they're feeding Rhodes information, and it's putting all of us at risk." Reynolds crossed his arms, scanning the room. "We start with access. Who knew about the location of the storage facility?" "Just us," Rachel said, gesturing to the group. "And my legal team, but they've been vetted. I trust them." Reynolds nodded. "Then it's someone in this room." The room fell silent, the weight of suspicion settling over everyone. Daniel's betrayal was still fresh in Rachel's mind, making her wary of misplaced trust. She glanced at Mia, who shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Mia," Rachel said cautiously, "how did you get that dashcam footage again?" Mia's eyes widened. "Rachel, you think I?" "No. I swear, I'm not working with them. I thought I was helping you." Reynolds interjected. "Then who sent it to you? Did they ask for anything in return?" "No," Mia said, her voice shaking. "It was anonymous. I thought it was legit." Rachel sighed. "Mia, I need you to go back through your emails. Look for anything unusual, metadata, IP, addresses, anything that might tell us who sent that footage." Mia nodded, her hands trembling as she pulled out her laptop. Hours passed, and the team worked in tense silence. Reynolds dug through police logs, searching for connections to Sinclair, while Rachel reviewed her case files, looking for overlooked clues. Finally, Mia spoke up, her voice trembling. "I found something." Everyone turned to her. "The email, it wasn't anonymous," Mia said. "The metadata shows it was sent from a server registered to Sinclair Tech." Rachel's heart sank. That footage was a setup. They wanted us to see it. Reynolds frowned. "Why?" "To throw us off." Rachel's mind raced. If Sinclair had sent the footage, they were manipulating her every move. But why? As she pieced it together, her phone buzzed with a new message. The sender was unknown, but the message sent a chill down her spine. "You're looking in the wrong place." Reynolds peered over her shoulder. "They're taunting you." "No," Rachel said, her voice grim. "They're steering me. They want me to think I'm in control when they're actually pulling the strings." Determined to retake the upper hand, Rachel called a meeting with Reynolds later that evening. "Sinclair isn't just reacting," she said. "They're orchestrating this. Every move I've made, every lead we've followed, it's all part of their plan." Reynolds frowned. "You think they want you to keep digging?" Rachel nodded. "Because they're hiding something bigger. Something they know I'll find if I keep pushing." Reynolds leaned back, considering her words. "Then we flip the script. Let's give them something they're not expecting." Rachel's brow furrowed. "Like what?" Reynolds smirked. "We let them think they've won. Feed them a lead so convincing, they can't resist biting." Rachel's lips curved into a determined smile. "And when they bite, we'll be ready." That night, Rachel sent another email, this time directly to Rhodes' known alias. The message was simple. "You were right. I'm out. The files are gone." Now, all she could do was wait and hope the trap would finally turn the game in her favor. Rachel stared at the email draft, her fingers hesitating over the send button. The message was simple, but carefully designed, a desperate tone, a subtle concession. It was everything someone like Rhodes would expect from a person cornered and ready to give up. "Are you sure about this?" Reynolds asked from across the room. "No," Rachel admitted. "But they think they're smarter than everyone else. If I play into that, they'll believe it." With a deep breath, she hit send. The minutes that followed stretched into an eternity. Rachel and Reynolds monitored the email server for any signs of activity. Finally, a ping broke the silence, a response from the alias Rhodes used for covert communications. The subject line read, "Good choice." Rachel opened the email. "Meet us at the docks, Pier 12, midnight. Come alone. Bring nothing." Reynolds' brow furrowed, as he leaned over her shoulder. The docks? That's classic. They might as well send a neon sign saying, "It's a trap." Rachel smirked. Exactly. They'll expect me to walk into it blind. That's why we're bringing backup. By 11:45 p.m., Rachel and Reynolds were positioned in an unmarked van a block away from Pier 12. Reynolds had called in a trusted SWAT unit, discreetly stationed in nearby buildings, ready to intervene if things went south. Rachel adjusted the small microphone hidden in her jacket collar. "Are we clear on the plan?" Reynolds nodded. "You go in, stall for time, and get Rhodes talking. The moment we confirm a confession or spot anything incriminating, we move." Rachel swallowed her nerves and stepped out into the cold night air. The pier was quiet except for the gentle lapping of water against the wooden posts. Dim overhead lights cast long, eerie shadows as she approached the meeting point. A black SUV was parked near the edge of the dock. Rhodes stood beside it, flanked by two men who looked every bit as menacing as she remembered. "Well, well," Rhodes said, his voice dripping with mockery. "The great Rachel Carter. You finally learned when to quit." Rachel forced a bitter laugh. "You didn't leave me much choice. The files are gone and my career's in ruins. Are you satisfied?" Rhodes smirked. "Almost. But there's one loose and we need to tie up you." One of his men stepped forward, holding a small device. Rachel's pulse quickened as she realized it was a signal jammer. "Your backup won't be hearing this," Rhodes said, his smirk widening. Panic surged through Rachel, but she masked it with defiance. "What now? You've already destroyed everything I've worked for. Why not just finish the job?" Rhodes chuckled. "Oh, I intend to. But first I need to know one thing. Where's the original file? The one you didn't tell anyone about?" Rachel's mind raced. He was fishing. He didn't know for certain that such a file existed. She squared her shoulders. "There is no original file. You destroyed everything when you stole the briefcase." Rhodes' smirk faltered, and for a moment, she thought she'd gained the upper hand. But then he snapped his fingers, and the two men grabbed her arms, dragging her toward the SUV. "You're bluffing," Rhodes said, "and I don't like bluffers." Meanwhile, Reynolds was scrambling in the van. "We've lost her signal," he said, his voice tense. The SWAT leader beside him nodded. "We can move in blind, but it's risky." "Do it," Reynolds said. "We can't wait." As Rhodes' men shoved Rachel into the back seat of the SUV, the sound of tires screeching broke the tense silence. A convoy of unmarked police vehicles roared onto the pier, their headlights flooding the scene. "Freeze!" Reynolds shouted, stepping out with his weapon drawn. Chaos erupted. Rhodes' men scrambled for cover, but the SWAT team was too fast, pinning them down before they could escape. Rhodes, however, remained calm. He stepped out of the SUV with his hands raised, a smug expression on his face. "You have nothing on me," he said as officers cuffed him. Reynolds smirked. "We'll see about that." Back at the station, Rachel and Reynolds reviewed the footage from the SWAT team's body cameras. It wasn't the smoking gun they'd hoped for. Rhodes had been careful not to incriminate himself directly. "This isn't enough," Rachel said, frustration seeping into her voice. Reynolds leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe not, but his men aren't as disciplined as he is. If we lean on them, one of them will crack." Rachel nodded, her determination renewed. Rhodes may have escaped justice for now, but the noose was tightening. Rachel paced the interrogation room, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. She didn't need the one-way mirror to know that Reynolds and the others were watching. Her focus was on the man sitting before her, one of Rhodes' henchmen, a wiry man with a nervous energy that betrayed his stoic facade. "We know you were at the pier," Rachel began, her voice calm but cutting. "We know you were working for Rhodes, and we know Sinclair Tech is paying you to clean up their mess. The only question is how much trouble you want to be in when this is over." The man, whose name was Greg Pierce according to the report, smirked. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a guy who drives a truck." Rachel leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. Sure. A guy who drives a truck with tactical gear in the back and a jammer strong enough to knock out police comms. Stop lying, Greg. This is your one chance to help yourself. Greg's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. You don't have anything on me. Rachel motioned toward the door, and Reynolds entered, carrying a thick folder. He placed it on the table and opened it, revealing photographs taken at the pier, receipts for large cash transfers, and a dossier on Greg's known associates. We have plenty, Rachel said, her tone icy. Including this. She slid a still image from the SWAT team's footage across the table. It showed Greg standing next to Rhodes at the pier, holding the jammer. Greg's confidence cracked. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the mirror behind Rachel. So, what? I was there. Doesn't mean I did anything illegal. Rachel crossed her arms. Greg, let me paint you a picture. Sinclair Tech uses you and Rhodes to silence people who threaten their bottom line. But Rhodes doesn't care about you. The moment you're a liability, you're expendable. Greg's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Rachel continued, her voice softer now. Help us take down Rhodes, and I can get you a deal. But if you stay loyal to him, you're looking at 20 years minimum. Do you really think he'll lift a finger to save you? Silence hung heavy in the room. Greg's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, he sighed. All right, he muttered. What do you want to know? An hour later, Rachel and Reynolds stood in the hallway outside the interrogation room, reviewing the notes from Greg's confession. He gave us a lot, Reynolds said. Details about Sinclair's offshore accounts, their methods for laundering money, and even a few names. But nothing directly implicating Rhodes. Rachel frowned. That's not enough. Rhodes is the key to this, and we're running out of time. Reynolds hesitated. There is one thing Greg mentioned. He said Rhodes was planning a meeting with Sinclair's board to finalize the fallout. It's happening tomorrow night. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Did he say where? A private estate in the hills just outside the city, Reynolds replied. He doesn't know much else, but it's a start. Rachel's mind raced. This was their chance to catch Rhodes and Sinclair Tech red-handed. We'll need a warrant, she said. Reynolds nodded. And a team ready to move fast. This isn't going to be easy. Rachel took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. It never is. But if we pull this off, it could end everything. The next day, preparations were in full swing. Rachel worked with Reynolds and his team to coordinate the operation. Surveillance drones were deployed, blueprints of the estate were studied, and every angle of the plan was scrutinized. As night fell, Rachel suited up in tactical gear, a departure from her usual courtroom attire. She joined Reynolds and the SWAT team in the staging area, her determination steeling her nerves. You ready for this? Reynolds asked. Rachel nodded. It's now or never. The team moved in silence as they approached the estate. Through the night vision goggles, Rachel could see the sprawling mansion lit up like a fortress. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their radios crackling softly. Reynolds signaled for the team to split up, each group taking a different entry point. Rachel stayed close to Reynolds, her heart pounding as they crept toward a side entrance. Inside, the estate was even more opulent than she'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light over marble floors, and muted voices echoed from a large conference room down the hall. This is it, Rachel whispered. The team moved swiftly, positioning themselves outside the doors. Reynolds gave the signal, and the SWAT officers burst in, weapons drawn. Hands in the air, Reynolds shouted. Chaos erupted as board members scrambled to comply. Rhodes, standing at the head of the table, remained unnervingly calm. Well, he said, raising his hands with a smirk. You finally made it, Ms. Carter. Rachel stepped forward, her eyes locked on him. It's over, Rhodes. But as she spoke, Rhodes gestured subtly toward a briefcase on the table. A moment later, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. The room plunged into pitch-black chaos. Shouts echoed as the SWAT team scrambled to regain control, their flashlights cutting jagged beams through the darkness. Rachel froze, her heart pounding as she tried to orient herself. "Stay low," Reynolds shouted from somewhere nearby. Rachel dropped to a crouch, gripping the edges of the table to steady herself. The faint clicks of a briefcase snapping shut pierced through the confusion, and she realized Rhodes was on the move. "Stop him," she yelled, her voice cutting through the noise. A flash of light illuminated the room briefly as a SWAT officer activated a flare, revealing Rhodes slipping out a side door with the briefcase in hand. Rachel didn't hesitate. She grabbed a flashlight from a nearby officer and bolted after him. The side door led to a dimly lit hallway that opened into the estate's sprawling gardens. Rachel's boots pounded against the marble floor as she chased Rhodes, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. "You can't outrun this, Rhodes," she shouted. Rhodes glanced back, a smug grin flashing across his face before he disappeared into the shadows of the garden maze. Rachel skidded to a stop at the maze's entrance, the dense hedges towering above her. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed forward, her flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. Every turn felt like a gamble, the labyrinth designed to disorient. She strained to hear Rhodes' footsteps, but the thick hedges muffled every sound. Suddenly, a faint rustle to her left made her freeze. She swung her flashlight around, its beam landing on Rhodes as he emerged from a corner. He was panting, the briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. "It's over, Rhodes," Rachel said, raising her flashlight to shine directly in his eyes. Rhodes smirked, pulling a small handgun from his jacket with his free hand. "You really don't know when to quit, do you, Carter?" Rachel's breath hitched, but she stood her ground. "You shoot me, and you'll never make it out of here. The estate is surrounded. You're done." Rhodes took a step closer, his gun trained on her. "Maybe, but at least I'll take you down with me." Before he could act, a voice boomed from behind him. "Drop the gun, Rhodes." Reynolds emerged from the shadows, his weapon aimed steadily at Rhodes' back. SWAT officers appeared behind him, their laser sights trained on Rhodes. For the first time, Rhodes' confidence wavered. He glanced between Rachel and Reynolds, calculating his options. "Don't be stupid," Reynolds said, his voice cold. "Put the gun down, or this ends badly for you." After a tense moment, Rhodes let out a frustrated growl and tossed the gun to the ground. The SWAT officers moved in, securing him in handcuffs and retrieving the briefcase. Back inside the estate, Rachel watched as the SWAT team cataloged the evidence. The briefcase contained damning documents, offshore bank records, communication logs, and transaction histories, all linking Sinclair Tech to its illegal operations and Rhodes' network of enforcers. "You've got him," Reynolds said, handing her a cup of coffee. Rachel exhaled, the weight of the night finally hitting her. "Not just him. This takes down Sinclair Tech, too." Reynolds nodded. "You did good, Rachel. Better than good." She gave him a tired smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and decisive. With Rhodes and the incriminating evidence in custody, federal prosecutors launched an investigation into Sinclair Tech's board of directors. The company's stock plummeted as the scandal made headlines nationwide. Rhodes, faced with overwhelming evidence, struck a deal to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony unraveled the entire conspiracy, exposing everyone involved. For Rachel, the victory was bittersweet. She had won, but at great personal cost. The betrayals, the threats, and the danger had left scars that wouldn't fade easily. One evening, as she sat in her office, Mia entered with a cautious smile. "There's someone here to see you." Before Rachel could ask, Reynolds stepped in, carrying a bottle of champagne. "I figured this called for a celebration," he said, setting the bottle on her desk. Rachel laughed softly. "You know I don't drink." Reynolds smirked. "Fine. Then consider it a trophy." As he turned to leave, Rachel called out, "Reynolds?" He paused, glancing back. "Thank you for everything." Reynolds gave her a nod. "Any time." As the door closed behind him, Rachel leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet settle around her. The fight was over, but the work was far from done. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey through Rachel's fight for justice. If you enjoyed the twists, turns, and intense drama, make sure to like this video and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another gripping story. There's so much more to come, stories that inspire, challenge, and keep you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next adventure.